Good afternoon, and welcome to this afternoon's session on the poetry of W.H. Auden. The reason, I'm sure there are many reasons to celebrate Auden, but not least this is the 50th anniversary of his death. He died, in fact, exactly a week ago, 50 years ago. He died on the 29th of September, 1973, which was a Saturday. I looked it up. So a week ago, 50 years ago. Auden is one of the true giants of the 20th century. And as somebody said to me the other day, he's actually the true British giant, because we need to recognize that perhaps Eliot was American and that Yeats was Irish. So maybe he's the only Brit we can truly claim as a great, great poet of the 20th century. What we plan to do today, my co-panelist is Paulo Cardinal, a lawyer in Macau and a professor of law. And what we really plan to do today is two things, one of which is to talk about Auden as a poet whose interest really was, I'm likely to use the word human rights, because that also has, raises hackles in some parts of the world. But Auden was very aware of humanity and human rights, and his poetry is tremendously empathetic to the plight of his fellow human beings. And unusually for his age, he's also very empathetic to the suffering of animals. Those are things we will talk about. And then we will, I think towards the end of the discussion, we will talk about his poems about Macau and Hong Kong. Macau does have the prestige, I suppose, of having a poem written about it by one of the greatest poets of the 20th century. So that will be the order in which we take it, I think. Paulo will already give the background, and as and when he says things which I feel have something to add, I will interrupt and we will discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenn. Good afternoon.
Oh, and we will screen the poems. Which poem are we going to start with?
A bit later. Okay. So thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here, and it's an honor to be talking about someone that means so much in terms of literature, but means so much in terms of causes, because Auden was a man of causes, not just an extremely gifted poet, but someone who looked at life, who looked at his social context, and was not afraid of acutely tell us what his impressions are, what his opinions were about so many things. Just to provide some very brief context, tell you that he was British. He was born in York, 1907. Later on, he moved into the US. He became, a few years later, a US naturalized citizen. He was a professor of literature. He has a famous book, Lectures on Shakespeare, that is still one of the references on the study of Shakespeare. And like I said, he was never a man alone with himself, oblivious to the world. He was someone that really was on an endless quest for justice, for human rights, someone that in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, where animals were viewed just as things, like in a Cartesian way, some things that cannot feel pain, some things that cannot feel any sort of emotions. He clearly was contrary to that, so he was, in a way, anticipating movements on the protection of animals. He was also someone that was worried about several things that was going on in the world. Don't forget, he was in the Spanish Civil War, on the Republican side, obviously. He was a left-leaning person. He was also traveling here when the Imperial Japanese Army invaded China, tortured Chinese, killed people relentlessly. He was obviously also present when the World War II began, and he has this famous poem, September 1, 1939, that Glenn will also mention and talk about it. He also wrote many essays. For example, he wrote an essay about Tolkien and The Lord of Rings that was extremely favorable to the work of Tolkien, and he sometimes was considered the lesser one of the three giants that were mentioned here, Eliot and Yeats. Let's talking in a sportive way, like the winner of the bronze medal in terms of like the third most important. For me, he is the winner of the gold medal from those three. That is not diminishing any of the other two, but for me, personally, as a reader, he is the winner of the gold medal. Why do I also have a special empathy, a special interest in Auden? Because as a law professor, I find very useful, extremely useful, several of his poems. Of course, one that is inescapable in this, and if we are regarding the relation between law and literature, law and poetry, it is the poem Law Like Love that will be read a bit later. Also, Unknown Citizen, which brings to me always, it evokes the memories of Aldous Huxley, and also the movie of Fritz Lang, Metropolis. The faceless people, the people that are not individuals, the people that are some little cogs in a machine, the people that are not people. The dehumanization, sorry for my dehumanization of what is the meaning of being human. And all this brings clearly, for someone that studies law, researches law, teaches law, I found that this is a very extremely helpful tool in my classes, in my lessons, in my notes. And I also found that some of the poems that I choose to illustrate some point that I wish to make, and I choose poems from Auden, usually the students really capture the essence of the message that I am trying to convey. As I said, basically, not only but those two, Law Like Love and The Unknown Citizen, are important. Before I proceed to the poems, I want to say a couple of things regarding this. For example, Auden was homosexual, but he was married with a woman, the daughter of Thomas Mann. Okay, you can think, okay, you married, why? Because he wanted to fit in the context of the society, to show that he is, let's call it, a normal man. No, he did not get out of that situation. He married Erika Mann because, as you know, Erika and her father, Thomas Mann, were staunch opponents to the Nazi regime, to Hitler. And Erika Mann was on the verge of being stripped of her nationality and on the verge of being arrested by the Hitler regime. So he married her so she could get a British passport. Other things we can mention about Auden: he was a supporter of many noble causes. Animals, we already mentioned here, feminist causes, and another thing that characterizes Auden, he didn't like to be publicized that he was helping, including financially, those causes. We can also think of him in many ways. He was someone, for example, he was a friend of Hannah Arendt, discussing humanity again, discussing human rights, discussing justice. So a man of the world, he traveled a lot, a man of causes, and really a man of a very high stature. Some other thing that I want to mention to you, probably most unknown, but the fact is, UNESCO, when they were preparing the official documentations, future international law regarding human rights, one of the persons that UNESCO asked to provide some help, to provide some insights, was Auden. And he authored a text named Reflections on Freedom and Art. This can be found in the UNESCO site. I will just read, if you allow me, some very small sentences that we can take from that paper that is sent to UNESCO. Freedom means freedom of choice. A man exercises his freedom when, confronted by two or more possible alternatives, he realizes one and excludes the rest. Free choices are definite choices. Choices are of three kinds: choices of action, choices of value judgment, good or evil, choices of authority. Each major revolution in history is concerned with some particular aspect of human freedom, and as its representatives, human type. Each establishes its kind of freedom once and for all. This was written in 1946, 1947. We are now in 2023, and I think his words, along with, for example, September 1, 1939, are ever more present, ever more adequate to these challenging times that we are living. So, maybe we can start reading one of his poems.
Which would you like to begin?
Probably Unknown Citizen.
Right, give me a minute. Yes, someone. Right, this is a poem I'm sure many of you remember from your school days. The Unknown Citizen, to JS/07M378. This marble monument is erected by the state. He was found by the Bureau of Statistics to be one against whom there was no official complaint. And all the reports on his conduct agree that in the modern sense of an old-fashioned word, he was a saint. For in everything he did, he served the greater community. Except for the war till the day he retired, he worked in a factory and never got fired, but satisfied his employers, Fudge Motors, Inc. Yet he wasn't a scab or odd in his views, so his union reports that he paid his dues. Our report on his union shows it was sound, and our social psychology work has found that he was popular with his mates and liked to drink. The press are convinced that he brought a paper every day, and that his reactions to advertisements were normal in every way. Policies taken out in his name prove that he was fully insured, and his health card shows he was once in hospital, but he left it cured. Both producers' research and high-grade living declare he was fully sensible to the advantages of the installment plan, and had everything necessary for the modern man: a phonograph, a radio, a car, and a Frigidaire. Our researchers into public opinion are content that he held the proper opinions for the time of the year. When there was peace, he was for peace. When there was war, he went. He was married and added 5 children to the population, which our eugenist says was the right number for a parent of his generation. And our teachers report that he never interfered with their education. Was he free? Was he happy? The question is absurd. Had anything been wrong, we would certainly have heard.
Thank you very much. I think it speaks for itself. Who am I to add some commentaries? I will just again remind, the first time I read this, and every time I read this, it comes to me Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, and Fritz Lang, those moments in the movie Metropolis where those infinite lines of people, faceless people, going, no one knows where, why, and in a certain way also Orwell, 1984, but Orwell was more in the sort of the stick, not the pill of Huxley. And this is a terrible picture, but unfortunately, it's not just fiction. It's a terrible picture that we have seen in history of humankind, and maybe there is the danger of here and there also we have to witness, unfortunately, the return of some of this sort of organization. What do I want to tell about this? Of course, the basic context that is behind this poem is Soviet Union. It's obvious, although some revisionists, for example, let me see, Nara Aligulova, saying, no, he's not criticizing Soviet Union, he's criticizing USA and the capitalist state and so on. Well, everyone is entitled to his own opinions, but it's obvious what was in the basis of this. And this also reminds me something. If I can read, maybe can I ask you to read? Sorry.
Which one?
Yes.
Timelessly human. Beware, be sentinel, brave new world, 1984. Be it with the pill, be it with the stick, they predict Huxley and Orwell. They were might, they were right. Thomas, man, you told us, freedom always embraces man. Freedom haters always subside. Democracy, you told us, is timelessly human.
much. I believe that democracy and what it all entails, human rights, freedom, it is timelessly human. And that is one of the things, one of the conclusions that we should always have in mind. And poetry, especially from a giant like Aldous Huxley, really help us to see the light even when everything around us is more or less dark. Also, moving to another one, I would like then to go to the one that probably, because it's a defect of my profession, it's a sort of, because I'm a lawyer, because I'm a law professor, so this is the one that is the pinnacle of Auden for me, that is law like love.
Law like love. Law, say the gardeners, is the sun. Law is the one all gardeners obey, tomorrow, yesterday, today. Law is the wisdom of the old. The impotent grandfathers feebly scold. The grandchildren put out a treble tongue. Law is the senses of the young. Law, says the priest with a priestly look, expanding to an unpriestly people. Law is the words in my priestly book. Law is my pulpit and my steeple. Law, says the judge as he looks down his nose, speaking clearly and most severely. Law is, as I've told you before, law is, but let me explain it once more, law is the law. Yet law-abiding scholars write, law is neither wrong nor right. Law is only crimes, punished by places and by times. Law is the clothes men wear, anytime, anywhere. Law is good morning and good night. Others say, law is our fate. Others say, law is our state. Others say, law is no more, law has gone away. And always the loud, angry crowd, very angry and very loud. Law is we, and always soft, idiot softly me. If we, dear, know we know no more than they about the law, if I know more than you, know that we should and should not do, except that all agree, gladly or miserably, that the law is, and that all this is therefore thinking it absurd to identify the law with some other word. Unlike so many men, I cannot saw law is again no more than they can. We suppress the universal wish to guess or slip out of our own position into an unconcerned condition. Although I say at least confine your vanity and mind to stating timidly a timid similarity, we shall boast anyway, like love, I say. Like love, we don't know where or why. Like love, we can't compel or fly. Like love, we often weep. Like love, we seldom keep.
Thank you. Now, if you allow me, I will lean a bit towards my profession, towards law, and I will focus on 2 or 3 small parts, stanzas of the poem Law Like Love. First of all, Law Like Love is not the title of the poem. It was never titled. Sometimes in some publications it happens to be identified as Law Like Love. Some other times, Law, says the gardener, is the sun. Why do I mention this? I mention this because when we read Law Like Love, we may be induced to think that law equals love. That is a sort of a binary relationship. A yes and a no, a black and a white, and so on. And that is not really what is in the poem. It is much more than a binary thing. It's a multitude of possibilities. It's a multitude of perspectives. Another thing that I want to say in the first stanza, law says the gardener is the sun, law in the one, and then tomorrow, yesterday, today. First idea, law exists where humans exist. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. Also, and it was very well put by you in your expression, law says the judge as he looks down his nose, arrogant judges. Today, yesterday, here, everywhere. Also a very sharp criticism on certain attitudes of judges. Law is the law. I don't have to explain. I don't have to provide justification. Wrong. You have to explain. You have to provide justification. You are rendering justice in the name of the people, not in your own name. Another thing that I want to also emphasize, yet law-abiding scholars write, law is neither wrong nor right. Law is a science, but law is not an art science. Law is not mathematics, law is not physics. Law always implies interpretation, and when it implies interpretation, we can never assume, even as a professor, that you are absolutely right on a given question. Finally, and this is my favorite part of this poem, others say law is our fate, others say law is our state. Others say law is no more, law has gone away. In here, it encapsulates one of the biggest issues of legal science. A naturalistic view, law is our fate. Positivistic view, law is our state. But it does not stop there. It goes more. It goes to something else. Others say, law is no more, law has gone away. What the Germans call Unrecht, the place of no law. The law does not exist, or it's a mere pretext for dictatorships to rule, to organize, be it again with a stick, with a pill. So here it encapsulates naturalistic view, either religious or not, positivistic view, the law is what the state decides, and the place that is terrible, where there is no law. If there is no law, there are no human rights, there is no democracy, there is no society of human beings. Thank you.
Thank you. We will read some poems. Before that, I'd like to just add to some of the things Paulo said. A number of things he said made me link various ideas together, and one of which is Auden's particular interest in the unknown citizen, but the faceless. And as he was talking, I realized how many poems Auden does actually give. He speaks about the faceless people. But before I talk about that, well, that's all part of it. Just from what Paulo just said about law, if you allow me to read perhaps one of my favorite poems by Auden, because Paulo talked about the Nazi state. And of course, what is so interesting about Nazi Germany is that the Germans were obsessed with the law. But the Germans inverted the law to make what they did legal. I mean, it's fascinating when you read about, say, the Holocaust, is that as the Germans are sending the Jews to the gas chambers, they actually meet to discuss, well, this Jew owns this property. If we kill him, to whom does the property belong? It's a legal issue. We can't kill somebody before we actually know the legal status of the property. So this is weird, both respect for the law, but also the great inversion of law in Nazi Germany and, of course, in other totalitarian states. But one of my favorite poems, again, this brings out Auden's interest in humanity and human rights, and a topic very, very relevant today, of course, the topic of the refugee, especially if you live in Europe. This is his poem called Refugee Blues, and it's supposed to sort of have the rhythm of the blues, I suppose. Say the city has 10 million souls, some are living in mansions, some are living in holes. Yet there's no place for us, my dear, there's no place for us. Once we had a country and we thought it fair. Look in the atlas and you'll find it there. We cannot go there now, my dear, we cannot go there now. In the village churchyard there grows an old yew. Every spring it blossoms anew. Old passports can't do that, my dear. Old passports can't do that. The consul banged the table and said, if you got no passport, you're officially dead. But we are still alive, my dear, we are still alive. Went to a committee, they offered me a chair. Asked people likely to return next year. But where shall we go today, my dear? But where shall we go today? Came to a public meeting. The speaker got up and said, if we let them in, they will steal our daily bread. He was talking of you and me, my dear. He was talking of you and me. Thought I heard the thunder rumbling in the sky. It was Hitler over Europe saying, they must die. Oh, we were in his mind, my dear. Oh, we were in his mind. Saw a poodle in a jacket, fastened with a pin. Saw a door opened and a cat let in. But they weren't German Jews, my dear, but they weren't German Jews. Went down to the harbour and stood down upon the quay. Saw the fish swimming as if they were free. Only 10 feet away, my dear, only 10 feet away. Walked through a wood, saw the birds and the trees. They had no politicians and sang at their ease. They weren't the human race, my dear, they weren't the human race. Dreamed I saw a building with 1,000 floors, 1,000 windows and 1,000 doors. Not one of them was ours, my dear, not one of them was ours. Stood on a great plain in the falling snow. 10,000 soldiers marched to and fro, looking for you and me, my dear, looking for me and you. Auden's great poem on the German Jewish refugee crisis of the 1930s, and as today we, certainly in Western Europe, face a massive refugee crisis, I think this poem is as relevant today as it was 85, 90 years ago. Do you have any comment? Or?
No, my comment is total agreement with you. And this is another example of intemporal value of Auden's poems. And I mentioned before regarding the other poem, when we witnessed the aggression war of imperialistic Russia in Ukraine, and when we witness other tragedies that are going on, we go back to Auden, and for sure we will find some very important reflections, some very important words that to help us, I will repeat myself, to see the light somewhere in this black room.
Mm-hmm. Let me talk a bit about the facelessness. You didn't come for a poetry reading, you came for a discussion in Auden, but allow us to read some poetry. I think we're going to discuss a bit later Auden in Macau and Hong Kong. We'll get to that maybe in about 5 minutes. But on the point of the faceless, I think it's perhaps worth reading. I think I forgot to copy it. Auden wrote a number of poems while he was in China, he came to Hong Kong and Macau, and then he and Christopher Isherwood went to China for some months. But one of his more moving poems, or more profound poems from his China, he came to report on the Sino-Japanese War. And I forget where, I think it may have been in somewhere near Suzhou, that he saw for the first time dead Chinese soldiers. He saw these corpses of Chinese soldiers, and he was then moved later to write this poem. Far from the heart of culture he was used, abandoned by his general and his lice. Under a padded quilt he closed his eyes and vanished. He will not be introduced when this campaign is tidied into books. No vital knowledge perished in his skull. His jokes were stale, like wartime, he was dull. His name is lost forever, like his looks. He neither knew nor chose the good, but taught us an added meaning like a comma when he turned to dust in China, that our daughters be fit to love the earth and not again disgrace before the dogs, that where our waters, mountains and houses may be also men. And this is the plight of the soldier. Of course, thousands of soldiers die in war, as they are today in Ukraine, and those soldiers are forgotten. They are merely numbers. And this is again the faceless numbers that Auden is so concerned about. He contemplates the body of a Chinese soldier killed by the Japanese, and he realizes this soldier, it will be forgotten. No one knows his name. He's completely forgotten by history. And yet he does interestingly say, he neither knew nor chose the good, but taught us an added meaning like a comma when he turned to dust in China, etc. etc. So even though he's not remembered, he's remembered like a comma. So a comma is a very minor point of grammar, but it does just clarify a sense. It has some little significance. And so even though he dies and he's forgotten, his contribution to China's freedom is not entirely wasted. And so there's this homage to the soldier, but at the same time the recognition that he's just one of the many millions of faceless, which is this particularly Auden concern. In my absolute favorite Auden poem, probably my favorite poem of all time, if you'll forgive me, is Auden's extraordinary poem written after the Second World War and inspired by the Trojan War. I won't read, well, maybe I will read the whole thing, because I absolutely love this poem, forgive me. It's called The Shield of Achilles. My students will know it, because I bang on about it in class. The Shield of Achilles. This is written in 1953, if I remember correctly. She looked over his shoulder for vines and olive trees, marble well-governed cities and ships upon untamed seas. But there on the shining metal his hands had put instead an artificial wilderness and a sky like lead. A plain without a feature, bare and brown, no blade of grass, no sign of neighborhood, nothing to eat and nowhere to sit down, yet congregated on its blankness stood an unintelligible multitude, a million eyes, a million boots in line, without expression, waiting for a sign. Out of the air, a voice without a face proved by statistics that some cause was just, in tones as dry and level as the place. No one was cheered and nothing was discussed. Column by column, in a cloud of dust, they marched away, enduring a belief whose logic brought them somewhere else to grief. She looked over his shoulder for ritual pieties, white flower-garlanded heifers, libation and sacrifice. But there on the shining metal, where the altar should have been, she saw by his flickering forge light quite another scene. Barbed wire enclosed an arbitrary spot where bored officials lounged, one cracked a joke, and sentries sweated for the day was hot. A crowd of ordinary, decent folk watched from without and neither moved nor spoke, as three pale figures were led forth and bound to three posts driven upright in the ground. The mass and majesty of this world, all that carries weight and always weighs the same, lay in the hands of others. They were small and could not hope for help, and no help came. What their foes liked to do was done. Their shame was all the worst could wish. They lost their pride and died as men before their bodies died. She looked over his shoulder for athletes at their games, men and women in a dance moving their sweet limbs quick to music. But there on the shining shield his hands had set no dancing floor, but a weed-choked field. And this amazing stanza. A ragged urchin, aimless and alone, loitered upon the vacancy. A bird flew up to safety from his well-aimed stone. That girls are raped, that two boys knife a third, were axioms to him who'd never heard of any world where promises were kept, or one could weep because another wept. The thin-lipped armourer Hephaestus hobbled away. Thetis of the shining breast cried out in dismay at what the god had wrought to please her son, the strong, iron-hearted, man-slaying Achilles, who would not live long. That poem, for me, encapsulates all of Auden. It deals with, again and again, with the faceless crowd, whether it is, in a sense, the fascist crowd, whether it's the millions of soldiers, whether it's the millions of ordinary people, they're all recognized in this. And then I think it's the absence of empathy which is at the heart of that poem, that very powerful second last stanza, where no one knows that one could weep. One could weep because others, one could weep because it's a world utterly without care or kindness, and I think that is what makes this poem so truly powerful.
Two boys killing a third.
Well, yeah, the girls are raped, the two boys knife a third were actions to them. So, I want to hear your voice, not my voice.
No, there's not much I can add to this. Of course, this is one of the most famous poems, probably together with the September 1, 1939. And if we have time, maybe you can read September 1, 1939. And in this, the Shield of Achilles, of course, it deals with, again, the faceless, the ones that are being sacrificed, the lowest forms of organization, numbers, faceless, etc., etc., etc.
But often, Achilles is a very significant figure in Greek mythology. But in this poem, he's criticized because in a way he is, I suppose, like a dictator. I mean, you forget all the million faceless dead, but you remember the name of Achilles. We all know the name of Hitler, we all know the name of other dictators and monsters, but we don't remember the names of the thousands and thousands of people whose death they caused in one way or another. So in this poem, it's really about the Trojan War is partly to give Achilles his heroic status. The fact that thousands of Trojans and Greeks might die was neither here nor there. We remember Achilles. And I think it's that imbalanced relationship between the powerful and the weak, which is, again, the poem is exploring. So maybe we should talk about Macau and Hong Kong.
So, but just to remember the September 1, 1939, and that very famous
we'll come back to
phrase, the low dishonest decade, which really it's something that became part of history in books, in politicians. Then Quayle used that to criticize Bill Clinton's administration, saying this is now our current low dishonest decade, and so on. So regarding Macau and Hong Kong, again, I have used these two poems as contrasts, especially when I was teaching a course on Macau and Hong Kong comparative constitutional law, so the comparative method, the comparisons, and I believe that Auden basically captured the essences of Macau and the essences of Hong Kong. And because they were the essences, they are still present today. Maybe not exactly as before, but in the essence, they are still present today.
Are you familiar with the poems? Are you all familiar with Macau and Hong Kong, the poems? I mean, should we read them, or do you know enough about them?
Yeah, it's better. Yeah.
Can we see them? They're so blurred. Can you get my? It's on the first page. Macau. Oh, there you are. Oh, good. You can see that. Okay. Let me read it. This is written 1939-38, but it's relevant. A weed from Catholic Europe. It took root between some yellow houses and a sea, yellow mountains and a sea. Its gay stone houses an exotic fruit, a Portugal come China oddity. Rococo images of saint and savior promises its gamblers fortunes when they die. Churches along brothels testify that faith can pardon natural behavior. A town of such indulgence need not fear those mortal sins by which the strong are killed and limbs and governments are torn to pieces. Religious clocks will strike, the childish vices will safeguard the low virtues of the child, and nothing serious can happen here.
So, human vices, picturesque place, almost like coming from a movie or something like that. And basically, the sad or not sad conclusion, nothing serious happens here. And if we make the contrast to Hong Kong, to the near past, Hong Kong was fighting for freedom, for democracy. The establishment was reacting. I'm not now saying which side I should be placed or what, that's not the point. This is about Auden. But the point is, something serious was happening there. Macau, the casinos were going on. So, and this really, again, Auden was capturing what was essential on each society. And now if we read Hong Kong, we will see even more this contrast.
What is so astonishing is that Auden was in Hong Kong and Macau for really literally just a few days, and yet he captured. He was en route to China. He arrived in Hong Kong, spent a few days in Hong Kong, came to Macau, and then got the boat up the river to go to Guangzhou. The leading characters are wise and witty, substantial men of birth and education, with wide experience of administration. They know the manners of a modern city. Only the servants enter unexpected, their silence is a fresh dramatic use. How in the East the bankers have erected a worthy temple to the comic muse. 10,000 miles from home, and what's her name? The bugle on the late Victorian hill, puts out the soldier's light off stage, a wall thuds like the slamming of a distant door. We cannot postulate a general will. For what we are, we have ourselves to blame.
So, in contrast, commerce, formalism, colonialism, something about a war, but they don't want to care about that time. Well, later on, as we all know, then Britain had to fight Japan, but...
And Hong Kong was occupied, but that's
later. So, sorry? Okay. The microphone. The microphone, okay. But just to be very quick, to summarize, and this is really a comparison. The contrast between two societies that are supposed to be basically the same, basically inhabited by Chinese people. They are geographically very near one to another. They speak the same language, etc., etc. But one picture. Macau, again, humane, vices, picturesque, nothing serious happens. And the other one, a few miles on the other side of the Pearl River estuary, what is important is commerce, formalism, colonialism, and the empire.
Before we conclude, what we've talked about today, this afternoon, is, certainly from our point of view, and I imagine most people's points of view, is Auden's deep concern about humanity, and his poems deal with this. One of Auden's other very, very great poems is his elegy on the death of another very great poet, W.B. Yeats. Yeats dies in January 1939, just before the war begins. And we're not going to read the poem, it's a fantastic poem. But in that poem, very famously and problematically, where is it now? Auden writes, where's the bloody line? Sorry. My apologies. I hope I haven't skipped a whole stanza. I don't think I have. Where is it? But why can't I find it? He famously says poetry makes nothing happen. Yes. Where is that line? Sorry? It's in the second section. So I thought in the second section, but why? You were silly like us, your gift survived, mad eyed and hurt you to poetry. Oh yeah, sorry. You were silly like us, your gift survived it all. The parish of rich women, physical decay yourself. Mad Island hurt you into poetry. Now Island has your madness and no weather still, for poetry makes nothing happen. And this has become a line which one always talks about when one talks about Auden. In this poem, Auden says, well, poetry doesn't matter. It makes nothing happen. It changes nothing. And I don't think that's true, but what do you think? It's an Auden fan sitting over there. So you have...
I think I don't want to take up the floor, but I think as with so many things with Auden, there's a heavy irony there. And I think one of the things that's not being talked about there, and what happens is after 1930. Thank you.
I think actually Auden's rather worried that poetry makes too much happen. His poetry changes vastly after the war. And I think part of that is because Auden is terribly afraid of his own poetic voice. After seeing the extraordinary power that Hitler's voice has on people, on those crowds at Nuremberg, Auden worries about his own ability to speak prophetically, to give you chills. And his writing after the war becomes almost involutedly domestic and intentionally trivial, I suppose.
So,
but yeah.
So on that point, an important point, Auden's poems exist in many forms. So when you read Auden, you have to make sure which version you're reading, because Auden famously, notoriously, from an editor's point of view, kept revising his poems. And he often withdrew poems. And the most famous case is his poem about Spain. He went to Spain as a Republican in 1937, and a lot like George Orwell, what he saw in Spain disillusioned him, because while he certainly supported the left, he was horrified to see the left burning down churches and killing nuns and that sort of thing. So it wasn't just the right who were behaving badly, the left were behaving badly as well. So he changes, his political views become more moderate. He was never a communist, but like Orwell, he was probably sympathetic at some point. But later he becomes a Christian. I mean, after the war he becomes a devout Christian. But in that poem, he very famously wrote, "We are left alone with our day and time is short, and history to the defeated may say alas, but cannot help nor pardon." And that line begins to worry him later, like the poetry doesn't matter sort of thing. And so he keeps changing his mind. So his poems evolve, and he scratches them out and he rewrites them, and he removes some from publication altogether. Because interestingly, he does revise his thinking quite often. And I think you're right, he does worry about the power of words, precisely, yeah. I think we'll stop there. What do you want to, yeah.
I think we can stop here, since we are not going to have the September 1, 1939, which was one of the poems that he refuted and he refused to be published again. But just symbolic in the way that he also brings us these posters that he have towards justice, towards peace, and totally against the war and the effects of Nazi regime. He lived in Berlin a few years before, and he witnessed things that were terrible, that informed his position, his opinions, his writing regarding these issues.
We'll read it's a long poem, so we won't read the whole, we'll just read the last stanza. Whenever I read this poem, because it's written in New York, and the first line is, I sit in one of the dives on 52nd Avenue, and I always read this thing of an Edward Hopper painting. I can always see Auden in a New York cafe or somewhere, drinking coffee and smoking. Auden, if you look at later Auden, he has the most extraordinary face. He did have some disease, but he's also a very good advertisement for the dangers of smoking, because his face is as ragged, wrinkled, which was partly some illness, but I think partly smoking as well. The last stanza is of this great poem, 1st of September, the day the war starts. Defenseless under the night, our world in stupor lies. Yet, dotted everywhere, ironic points of light flash out. Wherever the just exchange their messages, may I, composed like them of eros and of dust, beleaguered by the same negation and despair, show an affirming flame. And I think that's a good way to end, on that affirming flame, which in the middle, as the war starts, you reckon, a wonderful line, I am of eros and dust. He's a man with sexual appetites. He's human, but ultimately what matters is doing right and trying to maintain a sense of decency as the world plunges into war. Okay, stop there. Thank you. Last thing. Can you get that's Auden? That's not quite as old as you look. Can you go to the very last page? Because I just want to mention to you, you don't actually see it, but for those of you who are interested, because it's the 50th anniversary of Auden's death, BBC Radio 4 have just done a brilliant 3-part series on Auden. And unlike BBC television, which you can't get on iPlayer, you can get radio. So please go to Google, not Google, Chrome, whatever it's called, just get BBC Radio 4, WH Auden, and you can listen to these 3 half-hour programs which were broadcast 2 weeks ago on BBC. BBC Radio 4, all you need to know. It's a truly brilliant radio series on Auden, which I highly recommend. Okay. All right. I don't work for the BBC. But I like to, but I don't. Thank you.
Maybe one of the questions. Yeah, one of the questions very quickly.
Thank you so much for your reading and presentation. It was really interesting. I just want to comment on something, like if Nazis were really obsessed with law, then the law that they defended was kind of a Foucault kind of law, because the punishment that they had or the way they manipulate the law was just for their own benefits, or they believed to be their own benefits. As Foucault puts in punishment and discipline, we can see how the law can be used just to make people obey and preserve the status quo. Also, I think that this definition of Foucault might be a bit relevant nowadays as well, because actually we can see that we have that kind of idea that law should be based on justice. But then we can see that there are a few ones that get away with justice, especially, let's say, international banks or international companies that just get away with things. But if you owe the state like €1, they will come after you. And this is not just to keep the status quo in a way, because they are in power. Anyway, also the poem about Hong Kong, was it ironic or not?
Ironic.
Okay, because I was like, oh my God. Especially after the Opium War and everything, like how could it be like saying that this is a great management and everything? I think he should also write something about Opium War.
He's mocking British colonialism.
Yes.
He's mocking British colonialism.
Okay, so
A city well managed is... the Brits administer very well, but you know it's a setting up of an irony of.
Aids, right? You say especially the servants.
Yeah, the servants tiptoe in. You never hear of servants who they're there when you need them, but they know how to.
okay, I just wanted like a comment on this conception of law, or what it means to have a law, and if the international system is really an anarchy, as Thomas Hobbes would put it.
I'll leave that to Paulo, but all I will say on the law thing, going back, you mentioned the Nazi state. What is so interesting about the Nazi state is that there were numerous lawyers and judges who were paid up members of the Nazi party, who are the judges who send, most famously, Helmut von Moltke and others to be hanged for resisting Hitler. And a lot of those judges after the war they just carry on, they become judges in a new democratic Germany. So the law under Nazi, and the law under the new Federal Republic of Germany, the same judges.
Exactly.
Same judges.
Still very current.
They're still practicing law.
One more question?
No, I think Paulo's going to answer that law question.
Okay, very interesting, and this idea of law and justice. Law and justice are extremely similar, related, but they are not the same thing. Some of the laws are not justice or injustice, they are just technical. Why do you drive on the left side, or why do you drive on the right side? But ultimately, law is supposed to serve justice. The law in Nazi Germany did not serve justice, just served state terrorism, persecution, genocide, etc., etc. Auden makes point of this in that poem, Law Like Love, when he says, others say, law is here no more, law has gone away. That idea of Unrecht, no law, no place of law, law in the sense of justice. Obviously, it was very impressive, and Glenn also mentioned that the Germans were very worried with the law, the procedurals, the formalities, Article 1B and this.
On a superficial level.
No, they were not super. No.
If you want to kill a Jew, you first have to give a legal definition what a Jew is. You can't just kill a Jew. You have to have a law which says a Jew is someone with 2 or 3.
They don't have a law to protect them. For instance, there's no human rights for them. So.
But if you're a nice Aryan German, I'm sure there are laws to protect you. But to define a Jew, you have a law. You can't just kill people. You have to have which people are fit to be killed.
Yes, but you'll create the law along with your own interests.
That's what law is.
Yes, but they took it seriously. They took it seriously. They believed they were applying the law. Of course, no, they took it serious. What I'm not saying, obviously never I would say, is that that law was fair or just or was adequate. No way. But for them, they were applying law. And this is a problem that, for example, I don't want to bring here, but Gustav Radbruch, Hermann Heller, Hans Kelsen, all those Germans and Austrian great lawyers, academics, philosophers of law, they had to run away from Germany, or those that stay were arrested, lost their jobs, and so on. And the problem was, and Radbruch put this very, very clearly, law is the law, the judge says, again, something that Auden says, and there is no justice in that. And Radbruch said, no, you judges that allowed these Jew people to be killed, you must understand something. Law, when it becomes unbearable unfair, when it grossly attacks justice, is not real law. So you as justices, as members of the courts, should not have applied this law. And Radbruch was one of the people that really criticized what Glenn says. How come? You are Nazi Germany judge. After 2 or 3 years, you are again judging whatever. How can we trust you? So what you are saying, you are right. What I mean is they believed that they were applying the law, but I'm also telling you, many Germans believed, but many Germans put the point, this is not real law, because unbearably attacks the sense of justice. Like I said, Radbruch, Eller, Kelsen, Smend, so many, and other people, not just lawyers. Thomas Mann. Thomas Mann wrote a famous book about the democracy. That's where he says it is timelessly human, democracy and human rights. So, sorry, they are telling me to stop.
Let's go for the last question.
Okay. It's nice to see you again, and thank you for your speech. It's fantastic. I want to ask your opinion on the audience different opinion about Macau and Hong Kong because of the different lifestyle and their opinion of colonialism. Because as far as I know, in the 60s and 70s of 20th century, Macau and Hong Kong both has protest those anti-colonial movements that result in quite different.
Yeah, but this is written in 1938, 39. This is written before this is written on the eve of the Second World War. So Auden's not. I think certainly in the Macau poem, I think Auden is simply recognizing, in some ways, a difference many of us are aware of. What is the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism? And Catholicism is actually quite forgiving of human weakness. Brothels, whorehouses and churches go together because this is in Southern Europe, people are much more relaxed about natural vices, whereas Hong Kong's more uptight, more British, run along this very Protestant ethic of work and money. And I think it's partly that Protestant versus Catholic idea that he's also exploring in that. I think. Yeah.